Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Grizafi. We are doing 8.03 Algebra 2 today, which is long division of polynomial functions, and it is a lot of fun, let me tell you. I really do enjoy long division, but it is really similar to long division that you guys did in elementary school, except it's a little bit more fun because we've got variables in it now and a little bit more, sophisticated. All right, number 1 says, consider the graph of f of x equals 6x to the third minus 19x squared plus 16x minus 4. Look at the graph where there's an obvious 0 value. So what I want you to do is put that into your calculator. So pause right here if you need to. Go to your y1, type that in. I did that right here. So now I have y1 equals that, and I asked you to find an obvious 0 value. So let's hit zoom 6, our standard zoom. Take a look at that graph. And from our graph, we see that if we're looking for a 0, first of all, what is a 0 value? A 0 value is the same thing as where it hits the x-axis, so the x-intercept. Same thing as a root. So all of those are same word for the same thing. They're just written a little bit differently. But at this point, you just need to know 0, root, x-intercept, all the same thing. So I look here and I see, hopefully you can see my little cursor. It looks like it hits the x-axis here, but not at a nice point. But here it looks like it's going through right at 2. But let me double check to be sure. So I'm going to go to my second graph and I look at 2 and there's a 0. So it does hit exactly at the point 2, 0. This is good news. So that means one of my 0 values will be, oh, and it wasn't doing this, but now apparently it's started again, x equals 2. Okay, so that is our 0 value. So again, a 0 is the same as your root or your x-intercept. Okay. So your x-intercept, where it's hitting, would be at 2, 0. So now it says, what is a known factor? So when you see factor, I want you to be thinking of when you factor something into 2 sets of parentheses. So the parenthesis, one of these are each your factors. So if I know that my answer is x equals 2, think about what would be in those parentheses so that when I set it equal to 0 and solved, I would get x equals 2. Well, really, if you just change the sign, it'll give you that root. So x minus 2 would be our factor. So again, this is really important vocabulary. X minus 2 is the factor. X equals 2 is your 0 or your root or your x-intercept. Determine the quotient by using long division. Then find all 0 values. So here's where we're going to actually do the long division. We're going to take our f of x right here, and I'm going to write that out. So 6x to the third minus 19x squared plus 16x minus 4. And we're going to divide that, make sure it doesn't have a hook because it's not square root. We're going to divide it by what our factor was. So our factor was x minus 2. Here's how it's going to work. You're going to take just this first number, term, coefficient, and variable, which is 1x. And you're going to look here and say, okay, x times what gives me 6x to the third? You could also think of it as 6x to the third divided by x gives me what? So x times 6x squared will give me 6x to the third. And I want to try to line it up with the other term that has an x squared. So I'm going to put 6x squared right here. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to call this the rainbow part, multiply it by that every term over here. So every term in my divisor. So I've got 6x squared times x gives me 6x to the third. 6x squared times negative 2 is negative 12x squared. Now I want to subtract, but I'm going to subtract this entire binomial. So I need to make sure I distribute my negative. So whenever you subtract, make sure you change all the signs. Super duper important. So we're subtracting the 6x to the third, and we're subtracting negative 12, which means we're adding it. So now we're going to add straight down on each of these. So negative 19 plus 12 is going to give me negative 7x squared. These cancel, bring down my next term, which is 16x. Okay, there it is. So now we're going to do the same exact thing. So now I go here and I say, okay, well, I've got x. X times what gives me negative 7x squared? Well, negative 7x. So now I multiply that through using the rainbow. So negative 7x times x gives me negative 7x squared. Negative 7x times negative 2 is positive 14x. Now I want to subtract all those. So anytime I subtract, I need to change all the signs. So I'm going to make this into a positive and this into a negative. 16 minus 14 gives me 2x. These cancel. Bring down my next term. Now again, I only look at the x, ignore that negative 2, and I say x times what gives me 2x? Well, x times positive 2 does. Do my rainbow, multiply it through. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Change all my signs. So this becomes a negative, this becomes a positive. These cancel, I get 0. So 0 means I do not have a remainder. There's no remainder for this, which is good news because I chose something that based off my calculator, I knew x minus 2 is a factor. So if it's a factor of this original equation right here, then that means it does not have a remainder. It goes in evenly, okay? So that's step 1. That's the long division part. But now they still asked us to find all of the 0 values. So what I want to do next to find the zeros is I need to factor what the answer I got, my quotient right here. So I got this right here is my answer. So really that's saying this 6x squared minus 7x plus 2 times x minus 2 gives me 6x to the third minus 19x squared plus 16x minus 4. I want to break that down further. So I'm going to factor 6x squared minus 7x plus 2 to find the zeros. So to do that, since there's a 6 in front of the x squared, I'm going to try p's and c's. So my p would be the product of my first and last term, so that's 12. C is my center term, which is negative 7. Write it out as 4 terms, blank x plus 2. And what multiplies to 12 and adds to negative 7? That's going to be negative 3 and negative 4. Group up my first two, group my last two, factor out my 3x, leaving me with 2x minus 1. Here, since the first term in the parentheses is negative, I want to take out a negative 2, which means I'm dividing each of these by negative 2, leaving me with positive 2x minus 1. 2 parentheses are the same. That's good news. We group those and write those once, and then the leftovers go in the second set. So if I had asked you to write it in completely factored form, the original, we would take our x minus 2, which is what we got from our calculator, and then multiply it by what we just got, 2x minus 1 and 3x minus 2. So that would give you f of x if you had to factor that. So you can use long division to help you factor. And then we're still not done. We need to answer, and for 3, I didn't ask you for that. That's just kind of something extra. You would not have to give me that part. The last part said to find the zeros. So to find the zeros, you're going to take each of these factors and set them each equal to 0. Just like you would if you had factored a normal quadratic that we've done, and then you're solving it. So we get 3 different zeros. So x could be 1/2, it could be 3/2, or it could be 2. So there are 3 different zeros. So those are your x values, are your zeros. It's where y is equal to 0, and x is those values. Another thing that's important to know here, that if you look at the original, the highest exponent, that's going to tell you the number of zeros you'll have. So in the past, we were always factoring with x squared typically. So that's why we only had 2 zeros. But now it's x to the third. That means we're going to have 3 zeros, which we did in the end here. We had 1/2, 3/2, and 2. So 3 different zeros. Okay. Let's try another one. So number 2. So something else that I didn't talk about yet is that you also want to make sure that your dividend counts down in descending order by ones. So this goes x to the third, x to the second, x to the first, and then x to the 0, which is just 1. So that's why there's nothing next to the 8. So that's good. If it doesn't, you want to put in a placeholder. All right, so go ahead, take a minute, put that into your calculator, this right here, in for your y1. Do the same thing we did on the last one, and look to see at the graph where you might see a 0 value, so an x-intercept. And in this one, there's 3 of them that are pretty nice, so that are integers. So you can choose one out of those 3. Double check that they go through those points on your table. Go ahead and do that right now. All right, so I'm going to choose x equals -1 for my 0 value, which means as a factor, I'm going to write it in parentheses. It doesn't have to be in parentheses, but it has to be that x plus or minus a number. So I'm going to take, what would it be if I solved my factor and got x equals -1, change the sign, it would be x plus 1. So now I'm going to take that factor, because I know this should go in evenly, so I should not end up with a remainder, and I'm going to divide it into my f of x. So x to the third minus 5x squared plus 2x plus 8. And if you're feeling good, if you really understood the last one, then go for it, pause it, and then you can just fast forward to the answer here. But I know this is something new and can be a little tricky, so I'm going to take you through this one again. So here's our x we're looking at. We ignore that plus 1. We're looking at our first term. So x times what gives me x to the third? X to the second. So line it up over the x to the second. And then we're going to use the rainbow and multiply through. So I get x to the third plus x squared. Then we're going to change the signs because we're going to subtract that whole binomial. These cancel. I get -6x squared. Drop down my next term, which is plus 2x. Now I do the same thing here. I look at just x. X times what gives me -6x squared, and that's going to be -6x. Line it up over the x and do the rainbow. So that gives me -6x squared minus 6x. Oh my goodness. Not cooperating today. This is the second time I had to do this one because first time I finished the video and said there was an issue and that it didn't record any of it. All right, so now we're going to change all of our signs. And the first time around that I did the video, they didn't take away, it was writing much nicer. All right, so we've got 6x and 2x gives us 8x. These guys cancel. Bring down the next value. which is a positive 8. Alrighty, so now we say x times what gives me 8x? Well, that's going to be positive 8 and rainbow time. So now I have 8x plus 8. And I'm subtracting that whole thing, so I'm going to change my signs. And look at that, everything cancels out. Again, we have a 0 for your remainder, so no remainder, which means x plus 1 is a factor of f of x because it will divide in evenly without a remainder. All right, so that's step 1. And now step 2 is we need to find all the 0 values. So again, if you look at your original, highest exponent is a 3, so we should have 3 zeros. To find our zeros, we're going to take our quotient, so whatever we got once we divided, and we're going to factor it. So you're going to factor x squared minus 6x plus 8 to find the rest of those zeros. So that one has a 1 in the front, so I'm going to go straight to guess and check here. And what multiplies to 8 and adds to negative 6, that would be negative 4 and negative 2, set it equal to 0. Set each factor equal to 0. So these are my two factors. And then solve for x to find our zeros, or our roots, or our x-intercepts. So we get 2 and 4. So that'll give me a total of 3 zeros. So my zeros will be negative 1, which I found from the calculator, 2, and 4 from my final answer. If I had wanted this in completely factored form, which again I didn't ask for, completely factored, it would look like this. It would take x plus 1, x minus 2, and x minus 4 would give you f of x. Same thing. So 3 zeros, highest exponent is x to the 3rd. All right, the next one, number 3. So number 3, I'm actually going to show it to you a different way, just so you know for your homework. I think you've got a couple of these written like this. This is the same thing. Same thing, just written a different way. So x squared plus 3x plus 5 divided by x plus 1. Same thing. All right, so it says divide them, find the difference between this problem and the first two that we did. So let's write out our x squared and double check again that your exponents are counting down by 1. So we have x to the 2nd, x to the 1st, and then no x, so that's good news. We don't need a placeholder there. Divided by x plus 1, don't need a placeholder there either. So if we just focus on the x, ignore the plus 1, x times what gives us x squared? Well, that's going to be x. And then we're going to take x and rainbow multiply. X times x is x squared, plus 1 times x is x. Whenever we're subtracting, we have to change all the signs. So I have 3 minus 1 is 2x. These cancel. Bring down my next term. Then, and if you're feeling good, again, pause it, do it yourself, and then just jump to the answer here. And then you're going to check x goes into 2x 2 times. Rainbow multiply. 2 times x is 2x plus 2. And we are subtracting, so we need to distribute our negative. These cancel. 5 minus 2 is 3. Oh my goodness, there's no more numbers to bring down. Why is this different than the first one? Yes, because it has a remainder. I heard you yelling that at your computer. It has a remainder of 3, where the first two had a remainder of 0. They didn't even have a remainder at all. This one has a remainder of 3. So To write out our final answer, we're going to use this division algorithm over here. The Regents often ask you to write it in this form. So they say to take your quotient, which is this, so x plus 2, plus whatever your remainder is, so our remainder is 3, divided by your divisor, so whatever you are dividing by, so that's going to be x plus 1. And that's the format I'd like you guys to always write it in if there is a remainder. Okay, so write it with the remainder divided by whatever you are dividing by. So this right here, which is called your divisor. The number under the radical is called your dividend. And the answer is your quotient. So that's why it's q of x. R is your remainder over your divisor. Number 4. 3x to the third minus 2x plus 5 divided by x minus 3. So for this one, looking at your dividend here, we want to make sure that your dividend and your divisor are in descending power order. So their exponents count down by ones. Put placeholders with 0 coefficients for missing powers. So see how here you go from x to the third and then we jump down to x to the first. So we need a placeholder here for that 2 that's missing. So when we write it out, we're going to do 3x to the third plus 0x squared, because 0 times anything is 0. So I'm not changing the expression right here. I'm just adding in a placeholder to make it look a little different, which will be helpful when we're dividing. Divided by x minus 3. So again, we're only going to focus on the x. And we're going to look at the first term. So x times what gives me 3x to the third, and that's 3x squared. Line it up with the other x squared. Rainbow multiply. We've got 3x to the third minus 9x squared. And I am subtracting, so I need to change all of my signs. To cancel, 0 plus 9 is 9x squared. Bring down my next term of negative 2x. Again, look at x. X goes into 9x squared how many times? 9x. So now we do our rainbow. 9x squared minus 27x. We're subtracting, so we have to change the signs. These cancel. 27 minus 2 is 25x. Bring down our next term of positive 5. X times what gives me 25x? That's going to be positive 25. Rainbow it out. 25x minus 75. And change the signs. And we get 75 and 5 is 80. So we have a remainder here of 80. So is x minus 3 a factor of 3x to the third minus 2x plus 5? No. So 80 is our remainder, therefore it's not a factor. It only is a factor if your remainder is 0. Part B, so actually before we do part B, let's write our answer out. So our answer is going to be 3x to the second plus 9x plus 25, so I got that right here, plus my remainder, which is 80, over my divisor, which is x minus 3, would be my final answer. And now it says if p equals your dividend here, 3x to the third minus 2x plus 5, find p of 3. So just using your function skills, sub in a 3 everywhere you see an x. Put that right into your calculator. You can use STO or you can just type it straight in. And what does it give you? What? 80? Well, isn't that the same as your remainder? Well, why, yes, it is. So that's pretty cool, because what does that mean? If we take what our 0 is, so this is our 0 right here. Ooh, fancy there. 0 is at 3, or our factor is at x minus 3. Sorry, it's writing on, didn't mean to write on top of something. Oh no. So It's going to come back. The factor is x minus 3. The 0 is x equals 3. So if you sub in your 0 value into the original dividend, then it'll give you your remainder. So if you have a remainder of 0, it'll equal 0 when you substitute that in. It's like when we factor and we get our two answers and then we sub them into check, they both give us 0 because in standard form we set that equal to 0. Okay, this is not cooperating. So the last one here is, okay, I think we can do this. It is the remainder theorem. So what we just did, that is our remainder theorem. So we're going to take, if a polynomial f of x is divided by x minus k, the remainder is f of k. So it's whatever you get when you substitute in the 0 value in for f of x. Whatever you get, that will be your remainder. So let's try one. Using the remainder theorem, find the remainder of p of x when it's divided by x minus 4. So this right here, remember, is your factor. We don't want your factor, we want your 0. So the 0 is x equals positive 4, as if you set this equal to 0 and solve. You'd get x equals 4. So be really careful, because I could give you just x equals 4, and then you keep the sign. Or I could give you the factor of x minus 4, and then you have to change the sign. So really be aware of what you're given. Am I given the factor or am I given the 0? So we were given the factor, so we changed the sign to x equals 4. So we're going to sub in a positive 4. So what I want you guys to do is just show your substitution so I know what you're typing in the calculator. And then you can either type it right in or you can use stow. Take a minute, do that, see what you get. Right, I got 507. So I have a remainder of 507. So what they might ask you is x minus 4 a factor of this? Does it go in evenly? And the answer is no. Therefore, x minus 4 is not a factor of p of x because the remainder is not 0. Remainder does not equal 0. So a lot of this stuff with the remainder theorem and long division comes up on that Regents exam. So really important to know the connections between those. Okay, I hope you guys had fun doing long division, and hopefully this video is gonna work this time. And I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy, staying strong. Hopefully I get to see you guys soon. Loving math, doing lots of math dancing, and I will see you next time. Pi out.